Tonight we travel back to a winter unlike any other. A storm so vast, so relentless that it carved itself into the memory of a nation. The Great Blizzard of 1978 was not merely a snowfall. It was a siege of ice and wind that swallowed the Midwest and Northeast. Whole families huddled together in darkened houses. Highways became graveyards of stranded cars, and towns vanished beneath drifts higher than rooftops. It was a moment when nature's quiet beauty turned fierce and unyielding, testing endurance, patience, and community. Before we begin, if you find comfort in stories told in the quiet of the night, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Whether you are listening from the snowy valleys of the U.S., the misty countrysides of Europe, or warm and faraway places across the world, your presence here weaves you into this story. Prepare yourself. Pull a blanket a little tighter. Let the outside world drift away and settle in as we walk slowly into the white silence of 1978. It began gently, as many storms do, with a whisper rather than a roar. In the quiet hours before dawn, flakes drifted from a heavy sky, soft and almost secretive, as if winter itself wished to mask its intentions. The ground, already hardened by weeks of cold, welcomed the first scatterings of white with a brittle stillness. Street lamps glowed like golden halos, their light caught in a slow cascade of snowflakes that tumbled lazily toward the earth. In farmhouses across Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan, people stirred awake, rubbing their eyes and peering from frosted windows. The morning looked deceptively calm. Children pressed their noses to glass, delighted by the promise of snowball fights and sled rides, unaware that the joy they imagined would soon give way to something far different. Meanwhile, radio voices carried through kitchens and living rooms warning of a storm system creeping eastward. Meteorologists spoke with rising urgency, their tones sharpening as barometric pressures dropped lower than many had ever recorded. Maps bloomed with swirls, blue and white arrows cutting across the Midwest view. Listeners grasped the full weight of those words, dismissing them as just another winter storm forecast. By midday, the snowfall thickened. The wind began to pick up, first as a gentle breath, then as a steady push against barns and telephone poles on city streets. Cars crept carefully through the growing slush. Shoppers hurried out of grocery stores, their arms loaded with bread, milk, and canned goods, a primal instinct urging them to stockpile before the unknown arrived. The first whispers of unease threaded through conversations. How bad would it get? Would it pass quickly, or would it linger? Yet as evening drew close, the storm's true power remained hidden. Waiting, snow muffled every sound, wrapping towns in an eerie hush. The world outside seemed dreamlike, a painted landscape of white and shadow. Families gathered indoors, listening, waiting, unaware that by the next day their world would be reshaped by walls of snow and winds that howled like 1,000 voices. By the time dawn broke again, the storm had revealed its teeth. What had been a quiet snowfall was now driven by winds that screamed across fields and highways, carrying with them a blinding curtain of white. Gusts reached hurricane force, rattling windows in their frames, bending trees until their branches cracked and fell with dull, muffled thuds into the snow. In the Midwest, the morning commute had turned into a nightmare. Cars stalled in thick drifts that rose quickly across the roads, engines sputtering against the cold. Drivers who had set out with confidence found themselves trapped, unable to see more than a few feet ahead. Highways became graveyards of abandoned vehicles, their outlines vanishing beneath layers of snow, as if swallowed whole. Inside small towns, power lines sagged and snapped, plunging entire neighborhoods into darkness. The hum of modern life, refrigerators, heaters, radios faded into silence. Without electricity, families turned to wood stoves, fireplaces, and the dim flicker of candles. The smell of burning wood mingled with the cold bite of the air seeping in through cracks and poorly sealed windows. Farmers fought desperately to reach their livestock. Barn doors, half buried, resisted every pull, and animals huddled together in their stalls, their breath steaming in the frigid air. The snow outside was waist-deep in places and still rising, carried by winds that carved it into strange, towering drifts against fences and walls. In the cities, buses ground to a halt, schools closed, businesses shuttered, and the few who ventured outside did so with scarves wrapped tight across their faces, their eyelashes crystallized. In moments, the air itself seemed alive, alive with motion, alive with an unrelenting force. The storm was no longer a whisper or a warning. It was a presence unyielding, immense and determined to test the patience of every soul caught within its reach. Yet, in the heart of the chaos, families pulled closer together, neighbors checked on one another, lending blankets and sharing food. A quiet resilience began to bloom, as fragile yet vital as a flame in the dark. By the third day, the world had disappeared. What lay beyond one's doorstep was no longer recognizable. Streets, fences, and fields had all dissolved into a single, endless sheet of white. The storm had tightened its grip, swirling snow so fiercely that even the nearest house or tree vanished into nothingness. This was the dreaded whiteout, a world without shape, without horizon, where even sound seemed swallowed by the storm's relentless voice. For those stranded in their cars, the experience was terrifying. The muffled quiet inside offered little comfort as the snow piled higher around the doors, sealing them in like tombs. Some tapped on horns, hoping the sound might reach rescuers, though the howling winds carried little more than a faint echo. Others bundled themselves beneath coats and blankets, praying for warmth to last just a little longer. In homes, the cold deepened. Firewood stacks shrank quickly, each log sacrificed to the flames that crackled in hearths. Families layered quilts and coats atop their beds, listening to the groans of houses strained by wind and weight. Some roofs burdened by snow creaked, ominously, windows frosted over so thickly that even daylight could not pierce through. It was as though the storm had swallowed time itself, leaving only a suspended silence broken by gusts that rattled doors and shutters across the Northeast. Blizzard conditions, closed airports and railway stations. Entire cities stood still, their streets empty, except for the occasional emergency vehicles struggling through chest-deep drifts. Radios offered the only thread of connection, broadcasting emergency updates, words of comfort and stern warnings. Stay inside, conserve heat weight. And yet within that vast emptiness, moments of quiet beauty appeared. Children marveled at the snow piling high against the windows, building caves and forts inside their living rooms. From pillows and blankets in the candlelight, families shared meals of soup and bread, telling stories to pass the long hours. Even as the blizzard tried to erase the world outside, inside, people were holding fast to the warmth of one another. Amid the furious winds and endless snow, there came moments when the storm seemed to pause, though only for a heartbeat. The air would still, the world would fall quiet, and for those listening closely, the silence was almost unsettling. It was not peace, but the heavy, watchful calm of a storm gathering strength once more. In rural communities, families stepped cautiously to their doorways, pushing against drifts that blocked the way. What they found outside was breathtaking. A world transformed into a frozen desert, sculpted by wind into ridges and waves like an endless sea. Fences had vanished completely, barns seemed half swallowed, and roads had disappeared. Beneath rolling white dunes, every sound was muffled, every breath visible in the bitter air. But the silence was deceptive. Soon enough the winds would surge back, sweeping across rooftops, clawing through cracks and battering every surface with snow and ice. The storm seemed alive, a living force that exhaled, paused, and then drew in another breath to strike again. For city dwellers, the quiet moments were no less surreal. Streets normally filled with honking horns and footsteps now lay, completely abandoned. The usual glow of neon signs and traffic lights was reduced to faint colors diffused through falling snow. An entire metropolis seemed to be sleeping, wrapped under the same heavy blanket of winter that had smothered farms and fields. Inside, people gathered in circles around flickering candles or huddled close to wood stoves. Conversation softened, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile stillness outside. Parents told children to be patient, that storms always pass, though even the parents carried a quiet worry in their eyes. In that rare silence, the enormity of the blizzard could be felt most keenly. The storm was not simply weather, it was an event, a force that bound millions together in shared struggle. Each family, whether on a farm in Indiana or in a Boston apartment, faced the same long night, the same uncertainty, the same hope for light and warmth to return. By now, the highways of America's Midwest and Northeast had become places of stillness, not movement. What had once been ribbons of black asphalt threading through the land were buried beneath mountains of snow. Vehicles caught mid-journey stood frozen in place, rows of cars and trucks like silent statues, their shapes blurred beneath thick blankets of white. Some sat at awkward angles, abandoned by drivers who had fled in search of shelter, their footprints quickly erased by the storm. Truckers accustomed to the long, lonely hours of the road found themselves trapped in their cabs, engines idling until fuel ran low. The sound of a diesel motor fading into silence became one of the storm's many grim refrains. Snow pressed against doors, sealing them shut while windows frosted so thoroughly that outside light vanished. Rescue crews braving the blizzard worked tirelessly to reach those stranded snowmobiles and National Guard vehicles, pushed through drifts higher than their hoods, their lights cutting faint beams through the storm. Yet for every person they reached, there were countless more still waiting, hearts lifting at the distant sound of engines, only to sink again when the noise faded into the wind. Along country roads, families who had tried to drive home found themselves forced to abandon their vehicles and walk leaning into the gale, with scarves wrapped tight and heads bent low. Each step was a struggle, the snow clawing at their boots, the wind biting at their faces. Many staggered toward the faint promise of light from a farmhouse window, or the silhouette of a barn, praying that warmth and safety lay within the highways. Once a symbol of freedom and connection, had become frozen corridors of despair. Yet even here, kindness flickered. Strangers shared blankets, offered food, and lent hope to one another in the dim confines of stalled vehicles. In the face of the storm, humanity clung to itself, proving that even in the harshest silence, compassion could still be heard. As the blizzard deepened, entire towns seemed to vanish beneath the relentless tide of snow. Main streets, usually lined with glowing shop fronts and the bustle of daily life, were reduced to ghostly corridors of white. A store. Signs protruded only faintly from drifts that rose halfway up their windows. Park benches, lamp posts, and even small cars disappeared entirely, swallowed, as though the storm wished to erase every trace of the familiar world. Residents opened their doors to find walls of snow pressing against their thresholds. Some had to dig tunnels from their front steps just to glimpse the outside world. For children, it was a marvel, an unexpected labyrinth of gleaming corridors carved into drifts that towered above their heads. They laughed, their voices echoing in icy chambers as if the storm had built them a hidden kingdom. For adults, the sight carried a weightier meaning. Escape routes were sealed, supplies more difficult to reach, and the boundaries of normal life drawn in tighter and tighter. Inside small-town grocery stores, shelves began to thin. The rush before the storm had stripped away bread, milk, and essentials. Now, with trucks unable to travel the highways, there was no telling when supplies would be replenished. Yet neighbors shared what they had. A pot of stew made in one kitchen might find its way to 3 households. A single loaf of bread, carefully sliced, stretched across a gathering of friends. The stillness was broken only by the wind that groaned through empty streets, rattling loose shutters and whistling down chimney flue. At night, the towns glowed faintly from within windows flickering with candles, firelight casting golden patches against the snow from above. If one could have seen it, the scene might have looked like a vast field of stars scattered across a frozen earth. These buried towns, hushed and waiting, seemed both fragile and strong. Though cut off from the world, their people leaned into one another, creating warmth from shared company, from kindness and from the quiet certainty that the storm, however mighty, could not last forever. As the days wore on, the cold itself became an adversary. Without power, many homes grew bitterly frigid, their walls no match for the piercing chill that seeped into every corner. Breath hung in the air, curling into pale clouds. Even indoors, water glasses iced over on kitchen tables, metal doorknob knobs burned with frostbite sting at the slightest touch. Families layered themselves in sweaters, coats and scarves moving about their homes like bundled figures from another century. At night, they gathered under piles of quilts and blankets, children tucked between parents for warmth. The sound of teeth chattering, once a nervous gesture, now became part of the rhythm of survival. Kerosene lamps hissed softly in darkened rooms, casting amber halos across walls. Where fireplaces existed, they glowed like small suns, but their fuel diminished quickly. Wood piles shrank, each log weighed in the hand before being surrendered to the flames. In some houses, kitchen ovens were turned on and left open, their thin warmth, better than nothing. In others, families gathered in a single room, sealing doors with towels to trap whatever heat they could manage. In barns and sheds, animals endured their own trials. Farmers, their faces roar from the wind, shoveled paths through towering drifts to carry hay and water. Horses stood with their heads lowered, snow clinging to their manes, while cows huddled together for warmth. Every trip outdoors was a battle, the cold so sharp, it cut at the lungs and turned fingers numb in seconds. Yet within that strain there was also resilience, the laughter of children playing cards by lantern light, the quiet strum of a guitar by fire, the murmur of stories told to pass the hours. All of these softened the storm's bite. Though the blizzard sought to steal warmth, people found ways to kindle it anew, not only with fire, but with togetherness. By now the storm had found its rhythm, a relentless chorus that played against windows, rooftops and trees. The wind no longer seemed random. It carried with it a strange, almost musical cadence, like an instrument tuned to the key of winter itself. It howled through gaps in barn doors, moaned along empty alleys, and whistled over frozen telephone wires. In the stillness between gusts, it whispered low, as though telling secrets no one could understand. For those listening in the dark of night, the storm's voice was impossible to ignore. It seemed to seep into dreams, pulling sleepers into strange half-worlds of snow and shadow. Parents woke, often rising from their beds to check fires, to stir embers, to make sure children were warm. The sound outside, the steady roar of nature in command, reminded them that vigilance was survival. In farmhouses, the wind rattled against shutters with such force that the walls trembled. Icicles grew long and jagged from eaves, clinking faintly when the gale pressed against them. In city apartments, the blizzard's cry funneled between tall buildings, amplifying into a hollow wail that echoed through stairwells and darkened streets. For those trapped indoors, it was both companion and tormentor-proof. They were not alone, yet constant reminder of what they faced. The snow itself added to the soundscape. It hissed against glass, tapped like fingertips on windowsills, and roared in sudden bursts when torn free from rooftops. At times, it felt as though the world had been reduced to three things: the wind, the snow, and the hearts of those waiting for calm. And still, amid the blizzard's fierce voice, there were moments of intimacy. Families leaned closer, speaking softly to be heard above the roar. Children pressed their ears to walls, giggling at the strange music of the storm. The voice of the blizzard was wild and untamed, but within it people found rhythm, and within rhythm they found patience to endure. In a time before the internet and cell phones, the storm's lifeline came in the form of radios, those small boxes of voices and static that carried messages across the frozen land. Families huddled close as the hiss and crackle gave way to calm announcers delivering weather updates, road closures, and words of reassurance. The voices were steady, measured, and strangely comforting, like a lantern held high in the dark. Emergency broadcasts spoke of record-breaking snowfall and winds strong enough to rival hurricanes. They warned of dangers on the highways, of power outages stretching for miles, of shelters opening in schools and churches. To those listening, the radio was both a tether to the wider world and a reminder of just how vast the storm's reach had become. In cities, police and fire departments used every channel to call for patience and caution. Stories of rescues filtered through the earwaxes. A farmer saved after being lost in the drifts. A busload of passengers brought safely to a shelter. Neighbors digging together to reach the elderly. Each story was a spark of hope, glowing brightly against the endless snow. But there were also quieter, more personal broadcasts. Local stations played music when updates were sparse. Soft songs that drifted through the static like comfort carried on the wind. Families sat together, listening not only to the news but to the shared heartbeat of a nation enduring the same storm. The voices they heard might be hundreds of miles away, yet in those nights they felt as close as neighbors. Children sometimes drifted to sleep with the radio humming softly beside them, the drone of weather reports blending with the sound of the wind outside. For their parents, it was harder to rest. They listened with intent, clinging to every word, grateful for each promise that crews were working, that help was on the way, that the blizzard, for all its might, was not unending. Inside homes, kitchens became the heart of life. During the blizzard, with the cold pressing in from every window and door, families gathered around stoves and ovens, the heat and smell of cooking offering comfort as tangible as blankets. Pots of soup bubbled gently, filling rooms with rich aromas of simmering vegetables, herbs, and sometimes meat. Bread baked slowly, its warmth radiating through the home, a reminder of ordinary pleasures amid extraordinary circumstances. In some households, meals were stretched carefully. Each loaf of bread or pinch of sugar was measured and savored, portions shared among those present. Children helped by stirring thick soups or arranging slices of cheese on crackers, finding small ways to contribute to the household's survival. Even in scarcity, the act of preparing food became ritual, a quiet defiance of the storm raging outside. For larger families, cooking became a shared meditation. Someone chopped vegetables while another tended the fire. Someone kneaded dough while a parent told stories or hummed quietly. The warmth of the kitchen spread to the rest of the home, carrying with it a sense of safety that no wall of snow could erase. Occasionally, the snow would tap insistently against the windows, a reminder that the storm had not paused. But inside, the clatter of pots, the hiss of steam, and the laughter of those gathered created a separate world, one where warmth, light, and human connection reigned. The blizzard might dominate the land, but it could not touch the circle of people sitting close to the fire, sharing food and solace. Even as darkness fell, kitchens glowed like lanterns in the white expanse. Families lingered there long after supper, lingering in the comforting ritual of preparing tea or warming milk. It was a quiet resistance to the storm, proof that life, even when constrained by ice and snow, continued to unfold gently, carefully, and with hope. By the fourth day, windows had become more than portals. They were barriers and canvases. Frost spread across glass like delicate lace, each pattern unique, curling and branching in mesmerizing designs inside. The view beyond was no longer clear. Snow piled high against the panes, sometimes reaching halfway up the window, obscuring the world outside entirely. Children pressed their faces to the cold glass, watching for glimpses of movement in the frozen streets, their breath fogging the surface as they traced shapes with tiny fingers. The snow outside danced in erratic swirls, driven by invisible currents of wind, and sometimes fleeting shadows of neighbors or animals appeared and vanished almost as quickly. The outside world became a living painting, ever shifting yet distant and untouchable. Inside, families adapted. Curtains were drawn to block drafts and quilts were draped across windowsills to keep warmth. Inside, candles and lanterns threw gentle reflections onto the frost, casting patterns that mirrored the swirling snow beyond. The interplay of light and ice turned homes into small realms of quiet magic, where the ordinary was transformed by the storm's hand. At night, these snow-covered windows became mirrors to the storm's moods. Moonlight refracted through icy crystals, turning rooms into a soft silvery glow. The wind howled, rattling the panes, but within the household found serenity. Some read by lamplight, others whispered stories to children, and still others simply sat listening to the rhythm of the blizzard, finding comfort in the predictability of its presence. Though the storm kept the outside world at bay, inside families discovered that, even when boundaries are frozen and opaque, warmth, light, and imagination could carry them through the longest nights. The snow outside was vast and imposing, yet within, life persisted gently, slowly, and with steadfast care. By the fifth day, the blizzard's impact was not only felt in snowdrifts and cold, it reached deep into the essentials of life, and water became one of the greatest challenges. Pipes, frozen and brittle, were silent, denying homes their steady flow. Wells, sometimes hidden beneath drift several feet deep, demanded laborious digging to access even a single bucket. Families rationed what little water remained, measuring carefully for cooking, drinking, and minimal washing. Kettles were filled and boiled to stave off illness, and every drop was treasured. Children learned to wait patiently, balancing curiosity with necessity, while parents calculated daily usage with quiet concern. Even in homes with running water, forces sputtered and flowed sluggishly, a reminder that the blizzard's grasp extended into every corner of life. Outside, melting snow became a vital resource. Careful trips to gather it from drifts were undertaken with extreme caution, bundled against wind and snow, boots sinking into treacherous banks. The task was slow, exhausting, and relentless, but necessary. Every journey carried the weight of survival, and the cold gnawed at fingers and cheeks, leaving red raw patches that served as reminders of both danger and resilience. For those in more urban areas, residents' improvised bathtubs and basins were filled whenever water ran, and neighbors shared resources with one another. Each small act of cooperation strengthened bonds, creating a subtle network of support in the face of isolation. Despite the hardship, these daily struggles became rituals, slow and deliberate. Melting snow, boiling water, careful rationing, all were exercises in patience and fortitude. In the shadow of the storm, families learned the quiet lesson that even in scarcity, perseverance and community could turn survival into a shared, almost gentle rhythm. As the blizzard raged on, the sheer weight of the snow became impossible to ignore. Roots groaned under the thickening blanket, each flake adding its silent burden. In rural homes and barns, families fretted over the creaking structures, shoveling and scraping whenever possible to prevent collapse. The snow's accumulation was slow, deliberate, almost patient in its persistence, yet relentless in its effect. Chimneys strained under frost and ice, sending occasional showers of white powder down onto porches and walkways. Fences bent and snapped, their wooden skeletons bending to the will of the storm. Trees, their branches heavy with snow, arched toward the ground, sometimes snapping with a dull crack that reverberated through the air. The landscape itself seemed to yield, reshaped continuously by the storm's touch. Inside, families watched the battle silently. They measured drifts against windowsills and doors, mentally calculating whether a roof might hold or a barn might give way. Children, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it, skated across kitchen floors, their small feet echoing softly in the quiet warmth of the home. Adults moved carefully, mindful of every creak and shift, their vigilance, a quiet testament to endurance. Yet even in this wait there was beauty. Icicles hung like glass chandeliers. Sunlight refracted through them in fleeting rainbows. Snow on rooftops glimmered in the early morning, soft and untouched, a stark contrast to the storm's destructive power. The world outside was harsh and demanding, but inside families found strength and wonder in the small, crystalline details of winter's handiwork. Nightfall, during the blizzard, carried with it a unique stillness, heavier and more profound than any ordinary evening. Darkness descended early, smothered further by thick gray clouds that blocked the moon and stars. Outside, the wind continued its constant chant, whistling through eaves and between buildings, rattling shutters and carrying snow in sharp biting gusts. Inside homes, families lit every available source of warmth and light. Fireplaces glowed like small suns and candles flickered on tables, casting dancing shadows on walls. The long night stretched endlessly, measured in the slow ticking of clocks and the soft rustle of blankets. Even sleep was tentative, broken by howling gusts or the creak of settling snow. Parents whispered reassurances to children, reminding them that storms always end, even if it takes longer than anyone expects. The quiet hum of conversation became a soothing counterpoint to the relentless sound outside. Some read books aloud, their voices gentle and measured, offering both distraction and comfort. Others hummed tunes, the simple melodies weaving warmth into the chill-filled rooms. In these long nights, time seemed to stretch. Meals were spaced out carefully, chores completed slowly, and every small action, pouring tea, refilling the kettle, adding wood to the fire, became a ritual of care and attention. Even the smallest movements carried significance, a gentle rhythm that kept the household tethered to the world, despite the snow that had swallowed it whole. Outside, the storm raged, indifferent to human endurance. Inside, however, families discovered that in patience, in attentiveness, and in quiet companionship, the long nights could be endured with grace, even finding moments of beauty and serenity amidst the blizzard's unyielding fury. By the sixth day, roads had ceased to exist in the traditional sense. The blizzard had transformed highways and country lanes into endless expanses of white, where even familiar turns and landmarks were unrecognizable. Beneath layers of snow and ice, drifted mounds rose like frozen waves, swallowing mailboxes, street signs, and sometimes entire cars. Drivers who ventured out found themselves navigating blindly, leaning on memory rather than sight. Tires spun uselessly in deep snow, and engines struggled against the thick icy crust that had formed over the past days. Emergency vehicles worked tirelessly, yet progress was slow, measured in inches rather than miles. For townspeople, the vanished roads meant isolation. Trips to neighbors, stores, or schools were postponed indefinitely. Messages had to be sent through radio or shouted across fences when possible. Children imagined the streets as rivers of snow, their normal paths submerged beneath the blizzard's steady pulse. Adults moved cautiously, calculating risk with every step outside, understanding that even short distances could become dangerous journeys. Yet even as roads disappeared, people adapted. Makeshift paths were shoveled. Tunnels dug between homes, and simple acts like carrying water or firewood became exercises in endurance. The blizzard had erased the familiar map, but in its place, communities created new routes of connection, small yet vital to ensure survival and maintain bonds in a world reshaped by snow. In the heart of small towns where life usually pulsed with activity, The blizzard had transformed the squares into silent, snow-laden expanses. Fountains were buried beneath drifts, benches disappeared under layers of white, and sidewalks had become smooth, unbroken fields, as if the town itself had been reset. Streetlights cast pale circles of glow onto the snow, illuminating the delicate patterns etched by swirling gusts. Shadows danced across shop windows, though few shone from within, their electricity long since gone. The quiet was almost total, broken only by the occasional creak of a tree branch under the weight of snow, the distant groan of a roof, or the muffled sound of a person trudging through drifts. Those who ventured into the town square felt an eerie calm. The usual markers of life traffic, chatter, the ringing of bells, were absent. Even animals seemed hushed, with only the occasional crow or dog's bark breaking the monotony. Yet in this stillness there was a strange beauty. The snow smoothed imperfections, carved gentle curves along edges, and transformed every surface into a sculpted work of art. Families looked out on these empty squares from their windows, imagining the streets and shops buried beneath snow, feeling both the weight of isolation and a sense of shared endurance. For those inside, warmth and light became sacred, a small sanctuary against the frozen, hushed world outside. In these moments, towns learned to breathe slowly, to move gently, and to find grace in silence. Even as the storm raged on beyond their walls, the blizzard's reach extended beyond humans, touching every living creature that shared the frozen landscape. Farm animals huddled together in barns, their breath steaming in the icy air, seeking warmth in numbers. Horses pressed flanks together, cows nestled close, and chickens roosted in corners, feathers fluffed to trap what little heat remained. Wild animals fared differently. Birds, their usual foraging grounds buried beneath snow, huddled in thickened branches, feathers ruffled against the wind. Squirrels and rabbits burrowed into tunnels beneath snowdrifts, relying on instinct and small caches of food to survive. Even in the ferocity of the blizzard, life persisted, a quiet testament to endurance. Farmers worried constantly for their animals, venturing into the drifts with lanterns to ensure that water and feed were available. Each trip was fraught with risk, the snow deep and shifting beneath boots, wind tearing at coats and scarves, yet their care never wavered. They shoveled paths, carried water, and whispered softly to the creatures they protected, bridging the gap between human and animal through acts of perseverance and compassion. Inside homes, children listened with fascination as parents described the animals outside. Stories of a horse braving drifts to reach its stall, or a dog bounding through the snow to greet a returning neighbor, became gentle lessons in resilience. Even as the blizzard raged, the persistence of life reminded families that survival was possible and that hope, however fragile, was always present beneath the frozen weight of winter. By the seventh day, the blizzard had left its mark not only on landscapes and lives, but on the very air itself. Every breath carried the sharp tang of ice, the crisp bite of frozen snowflakes colliding with the wind. When exhaled, it left a mist that lingered, curling around faces and eyelashes, turning ordinary moments into sensory reminders of winter's hold. Inside homes, cooking and boiling water became more than necessity. They were ways to taste warmth itself. Steaming bowls of soup, hot tea, and freshly baked bread offered comfort that reached beyond hunger, nourishing both body and spirit. The scent of warming kitchens mingled with the faint odor of damp clothing and wood smoke, creating an atmosphere of intimacy that contrasted sharply with the fierce world. Outside, even snow carried a flavor. Children pressed snowflakes to their tongues, tasting a fleeting purity, a frozen sweetness that felt almost magical. Adults, more cautious, sometimes melted snow over fires to supplement scarce water supplies, appreciating the simple, icy refreshment that the storm grudgingly offered. Outside, the air was flavored with the storm itself, sharp, metallic, and alive, Each gust brought the scent of distant pine forests, churned earth, and the faint trace of human habitation carried over miles of frozen land. Walking through it was a full-body experience, every inhale a reminder of the blizzard's omnipresence. In these moments, families and communities discovered subtle joys: the taste, the smell, the warmth of meals, and the simple act of breathing. Each became a gentle anchor in a world reshaped by snow and ice. Even in hardship, the sensory world offered small comforts, weaving a tapestry of resilience and calm amidst the storm. As the days stretched into over a week, candlelight became both a practical necessity and a symbol of quiet hope. With power outages common across towns and rural areas alike, the soft flickering glow of candles filled rooms with warmth and familiarity. Their light cast long, dancing shadows on walls, giving even the smallest spaces a sense of depth and movement. Families gathered close, often around a single table or fireplace, the flame illuminating faces etched with fatigue but softened by shared presence. Children's eyes reflected the amber glow wide with curiosity, while adults found themselves slowing their movements, speaking in gentle tones as if afraid to disturb the fragile light. Each candle was treasured not only for illumination, but for the comfort it provided. A small sun in a world frozen and dimmed. Evenings were filled with quiet activities. Some read aloud from books, their voices steady and calm. Others played simple games, cards or board games, laughter muted yet warm. In the rare moments of silence, the only sounds were the soft hiss of wax melting and the ever-present whisper of wind pressing against the windows. In households with multiple rooms, families often moved together into a single space, sealing doors with blankets to preserve warmth. The glow of candlelight became a beacon of security and togetherness. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, but inside life retained its gentle rhythms. Each flicker of flame a reminder that even in darkness, hope and warmth could persist. Amid the blizzard's relentless assault, the long hours indoors allowed people to connect with memories, stories and voices from the past. Elders recounted tales of winters long ago, of storms less fierce yet still formidable, of families and neighbors enduring hardship together. These stories, shared by firelight or candle glow, created a bridge between generations, reminding everyone that endurance and resilience were woven into the very fabric of life. Children listened with rapt attention, imagining horses trudging through drifts, farmers laboring under frozen skies, and families huddled together for warmth. They asked questions. What did they eat? How did they stay warm? And the answers unfolded slowly in measured words that carried the weight of lived experience. Even the simplest tales became lessons in patience, courage, and hope. Adults, too, found comfort in these narratives. They compared past storms with the present one, drawing parallels and differences, but also realizing that the human spirit, tested repeatedly through the years, remained unbroken. The act of remembering and sharing reinforced a quiet strength, one that the blizzard could never extinguish. The wind outside howled and whipped, yet inside the rhythm of storytelling created warmth stronger than any fire alone. Time seemed to fold, blending past and present and offering reassurance that life had endured and would continue to endure through even the harshest of winters. Gardens once vibrant with life and color were now entirely surrendered to the blizzard. Flower beds lay buried beneath thick blankets of snow, their shapes hinted at only by the occasional stem or twig peeking above the drift. Lawns disappeared entirely, transformed into soft, rolling expanses that stretched uninterrupted from one property line to the next. For gardeners, this was a quiet sorrow. The effort of months, the blooms and greenery seemed erased, hidden under a thick crystalline cover. Yet in the silence of snow-covered yards, there was also a kind of peace. Branches dripped with frost that glittered like tiny diamonds in any stray. Sunlight icicles formed along fences and trellises long and elegant, sculpted by the persistent wind. Children found wonder in these frozen landscapes. Snow tunnels were dug, forts constructed, and gardens transformed into magical realms where imagination roamed free. The storm had created its own artistry, and through play, the harshness of winter became a canvas for creativity and joy, even for adults. The gardens offered quiet meditation, stepping carefully through drifts to check on fence lines or buried vegetables. They noted the intricate patterns left by wind and snow. Nature, even in its frozen slumber, was alive with texture, sound, and subtle beauty. In these moments, families recognized a simple truth. Even when the familiar world is hidden beneath layers of ice and snow, life persists. The garden, though frozen, holds promise of renewal. Just as the people within the homes nearby hold the eventual thaw, every footstep outside became a profound statement against the blizzard. With roads and paths buried, even the shortest journey fetching firewood, checking on neighbors or delivering supplies was an act of endurance. Boots sank deep into drifts. Each step met with resistance as the wind tried to push back, scattering snow and obscuring the trail. Immediately behind, the sound of footsteps was muffled by the storm's roar. Yet in moments of relative calm, the faint crunch of snow under boots carried across yards and streets. It became a quiet rhythm, a heartbeat in the frozen landscape signaling life persists despite the storm. Parents taught children to walk carefully, leaning forward against gusts, arms swinging for balance, lips pressed tight against scarves. Neighbors' steps approaching through the white haze were often greeted with relief. Shared labor, moving firewood, shoveling paths, or checking on livestock built bonds. Each set of footprints a mark of compassion. Even in isolation, these brief encounters reminded people that community endured beyond the drifts and gusts. Inside, the sound of someone stepping onto a porch or knocking at a door carried extraordinary significance. Children would pause, ears straining to catch the faintest noise, and adults exchange glances, hearts lifted by the reminder of human connection. Each step in the storm was small yet monumental, a testament to resilience and care amidst a world smothered in snow. Above every home, the storm painted roof lines with thick layers of snow and ice, creating landscapes that seemed almost sculptural. Chimneys were capped in frozen crowns, shingles hidden beneath unbroken sheets of white, and eaves bowed under the relentless weight. The accumulated snow created patterns that shifted subtly with every gust of wind, transforming familiar rooftops into alien forms. For families inside, watching the frost build became a daily ritual. Some stood by windows, tracing shapes with gloved hands or marveling at how icicles dripped and reformed with each passing hour. The roofs told the story of the storm's persistence, a visual record of the forces pressing down on the world outside. In towns, entire blocks became uniform waves of white, the repetition of frosted roof lines, giving a strange sense of rhythm and order to the chaos. Streetlights highlighted glimmering ice, reflecting and refracting light in ways that made even familiar streets feel magical. Though dangerous, the threat of collapse loomed in the back of every mind. In rural homes and barns, roofs groaned and flexed under the burden, prompting careful removal of snow where possible. Yet despite the risk, there was also beauty, a reminder that even in hardship, winter could craft forms that were delicate, intricate, and mesmerizing. Families learned to see both the danger and the wonder, holding awareness and awe simultaneously as the storm reshaped the very skyline above them. Attics, often the warmest refuge in milder winters, offered little solace. During the blizzard, snow pressed against roofs so heavily that drafts snuck through even the smallest cracks, carrying with them a chill that reached deep into every corner. Stored blankets and quilts, once a promise of comfort, were tested against temperatures that seemed to seep into bones. Families adapted by layering even more, placing old coats and extra bedding in sleeping areas and using small contained fires when possible to add warmth to the upper rooms. Children curled beneath piles of blankets, sharing body heat while adults monitored the spaces, adjusting layers and checking that insulation was holding. Even the simplest tasks, fetching a lantern, closing a shutter, became measured exercises in care for some. Attics also became spaces of quiet reflection, separated slightly from the main rooms. The hush allowed thoughts to drift freely, accompanied only by the muffled groan of roofs and the distant howl of wind. Journals were opened, letters written and memories revisited, each small act creating a sense of control and intimacy in a world dictated by the storm. Animals sometimes found their way into attics as well, cats curling into corners, dogs lying near the warmest spot. Their presence added comfort, a living pulse against the frozen stillness that surrounded the home. In attics, as in other parts of the home, families discovered the delicate balance between vulnerability and resilience. The chill reminded them of the storm's power, while the warmth they cultivated, the bonds they shared, and the attention they gave to every detail allowed life to continue softly, patiently, and with enduring hope. With the storm burying streets and highways, the delivery of mail became an extraordinary challenge. Letters, postcards, and packages that usually arrived with dependable regularity were delayed, some stranded in post offices or trucks trapped in drifts for days. For many, the absence of these daily connections was felt deeply, as if the world outside had paused entirely. Families checked windows for the familiar clatter of mailboxes, only to be greeted by silence or snow mounds blocking access. When the postman did manage to arrive, often on foot or through carefully cleared paths, it was an event of quiet celebration. Children ran to greet the visitor, eyes bright with anticipation, while adults offered warm greetings and thanks, sharing whatever news or encouragement they could in fleeting words. Inside, letters that did arrive were cherished. Handwritten notes and photographs became anchors, small reminders of people and places beyond the storm's reach. Reading aloud from letters allowed families to feel connected, their imaginations filling in the details of distant landscapes and lives unaffected by the snow. Even with delays, the act of communication persisted. Telephones, when working, became vital lifelines, and neighbors found ways to relay messages in person. Every effort to reach out reinforced bonds, reminding everyone that though the blizzard had slowed the world, it could not sever the ties that held communities together. Fences, those familiar markers of property and boundary, had disappeared beneath the relentless accumulation of snow. What were once straight lines of wood or wire now emerged sporadically, drifts piling high against posts, bending them toward the ground or hiding them entirely. Walking along property lines became a slow, careful endeavor, as the landscape offered no clear guidance. Children playing outside discovered these hidden barriers with delight. Snow forts were built to top buried fences, tunnels carved along them, and the transformed lines became secret pathways for imaginative games. Yet for adults, the altered fences were a reminder of the storm's strength, a physical manifestation of how completely the world had been reshaped. Farmers and rural families worked cautiously to check the integrity of fences. Snow-laden boards threatened to snap under. Weight and hidden barbed wire could catch unwary. Boots, despite the labor, maintaining boundaries became a quiet ritual, preserving some order amid the chaos in towns. Fences along parks or vacant lots offered similar lessons. The snow rendered the familiar, strange, inviting wonder and caution in equal measure. Families walked slowly, listening to the crunch underfoot, observing the way the wind sculpted drifts against posts, even in the white expanse. These lines reminded people of both human presence and the impermanence of structures when confronted by nature's vast and patient force. Trees, stoic sentinels of the landscape, bore the blizzard's force with quiet dignity. Branches were thickly coated with snow and frost, bending gracefully under the accumulating weight. In some places, the wind had stripped bark of its warmth, leaving skeletal outlines silhouetted against the gray sky, while in others snow clung so heavily that limbs groaned and occasionally snapped, sending showers of white cascading to the ground. Walking through these frozen woods or avenues was like entering another world. The crunch of boots on packed snow, the occasional shiver of branches settling, and the subtle scent of pine and ice created a sensory experience both calming and humbling. Children marveled at icicles dangling like chandeliers, the sunlight refracting through them in tiny rainbows, while adults moved carefully, aware of hidden hazards beneath the pristine surface. For those living near forests or groves, the trees provided partial shelter from the wind. Snow-laden branches acted as a buffer, reducing the full force of gusts and creating small pockets of calm. Farmers sometimes guided livestock to these sheltered areas, hoping to spare them the worst of the storm's fury. In every tree, the blizzard's mark was visible, patterns carved by wind, frost forming delicate lace along every twig, and snow sculpting each limb into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. Amid the hardship, the frosted trees offered moments of beauty and reflection, gentle reminders that even in the harshest winters, nature could create art with quiet patience. By the 8th day, even inside homes, the blizzard left its mark on the smallest details. Windows were thick with condensation, fogged by the collective breath of families tucked inside for warmth. Each exhale traced fleeting patterns on the glass, curling and merging until wiped away by mittened hands or drifting frost. Children pressed their faces close, drawing shapes with fingers, hearts, animals, or abstract swirls, watching them vanish as the cold air outside reclaimed the surface. Adults leaning against sills observed the subtle interplay of warmth and chill, reflecting on the rhythm of daily life. Slowed to match the storm, the fogged windows also became portals to imagination. Beyond the frosted panes, the snow's swirl was indistinct, yet inside reflections doubled the space, making rooms seem larger, shadows longer, and candlelight glow warmer. Even the smallest room became a theater of light and shadow, movement and stillness, all shaped by the storm outside and the human presence. Within these moments, though quiet, carried profound intimacy. Families spoke softly, their words drifting through the misted glass. Laughter was muted but sweeter for the closeness. And the simple act of tracing patterns on windows became a shared ritual, a way to mark time, connect and find gentle amusement in a world constrained by snow and wind. As the blizzard entered its second week, the silence outside grew heavier, almost tangible. With roads impossible, highways buried and towns emptied of their usual bustle, the world seemed suspended, held in place by snow and wind. The usual sounds of life car engines, footsteps, distant voices were muffled or vanished entirely, leaving only the whisper of the storm and the occasional groan of ice-laden trees. Inside homes, the silence was broken by the gentle hum of shared life, the crackle of firewood in a hearth, the hiss of a kettle, the soft murmur of conversation. Families adapted, speaking in quieter tones, moving slowly as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace within. Even children learned to tiptoe across floors, their curiosity tempered by the blizzard's omnipresent reminder of restraint and caution. The hush outside allowed for new awareness. Each sound, no matter how small, carried significance. The distant bark of a dog, the faint crunch of snow under a neighbor's boots, the flutter of curtains in a drafty window. Silence became a lens through which people could feel the storm's reach, understand its rhythm and measure the passage of time. Though the world felt suspended, this quiet was not emptiness, it was presence. It encouraged reflection, mindfulness, and an appreciation for warmth, light, and companionship. Even in isolation, families found solace in small noises, gestures, and shared rituals, discovering that silence too could nurture hope and resilience. Fires became the beating heart of homes during the blizzard, small suns around which life gathered in hearths and stoves. Flames flickered and danced, casting warm amber light across walls and faces, offering both heat and comfort. Their crackling sound was a gentle counterpoint to the howl of the wind outside, a reminder that warmth could persist even when the world beyond was unyielding. Fuel was precious. Wood piles, carefully rationed, were monitored constantly. Each log added was measured for maximum effect, stoked gently to maintain steady warmth without exhausting resources too quickly. In homes with coal or kerosene stoves, the same care was exercised with families learning the rhythm of tending fires as an essential, almost meditative practice. Around the flames, families slowed their pace. Children pressed closer to parents or siblings, small hands warmed by proximity. Stories were told, songs hummed, and sometimes silence was shared, the presence of the fire sufficient to fill the space with reassurance. Even chores became more deliberate. Movement softened to avoid disturbing the warmth. Fires were not only physical sources of heat, but emotional anchors. They symbolized safety, stability, and persistence. As the blizzard raged, each crackle and spark became a gentle promise. The storm was formidable, but within the circle of light, life endured slowly, patiently, and with a quiet grace that mirrored the rhythm of the flames themselves. With each passing day, the storm revealed its own peculiar patterns. Snow did not fall uniformly. It sculpted the land into drifts and ridges, hollowed tunnels, and carved smooth slopes across fields, streets, and rooftops. The wind traced invisible lines across the surface, leaving delicate ripples and subtle curves, a silent artistry that transformed the familiar into something unrecognizable, yet mesmerizing. Farmers observed these changes with a mixture of caution and wonder. Corn stalks and fences, hidden beneath thick white blankets, cast shadows that shifted with the wind. Trees bent in arcs, their limbs coated in snow, forming temporary arches and passageways. Even the simplest yard appeared sculpted, a testament to the storm's persistent, patient hand. Children found magic in these patterns, seeing shapes and figures and drifts, playing in the tunnels that formed naturally along fences and walls. Adults, too, paused to notice the artistry, appreciating how nature's force could create something both beautiful and formidable. Within homes, families discussed the changes, marking snow lines against windowsills or doors, keeping track of the storm's passage. These patterns, though silent and immutable, offered information, guidance, and an unexpected source of fascination. The blizzard, relentless and vast, had left its fingerprint on every surface, teaching patience, attention, and the subtle wonder that could be found even in hardship. Beneath the beauty of snow-covered landscapes, the blizzard imposed a hidden struggle on every household. Small challenges, often unnoticed at first, accumulated frozen hinges that would not turn, doors sticking tight with ice and roofs sagging under weight. Even minor inconveniences demanded constant attention. A slow, steady effort to maintain the fragile order within families worked together to meet these challenges. Parents shoveled pathways cautiously, mindful of every step. Children assisted by carrying small bundles of firewood or clearing snow from windowsills. Every action, no matter how small, became an essential thread in the fabric of daily survival. Even routine chores took on new significance. Fetching water required careful planning, food had to be rationed with precision, and heating sources demanded constant vigilance. The storm revealed the quiet labor that sustains life, making each movement deliberate, each gesture meaningful. Yet within this struggle, there was resilience. Families adapted to the new rhythm, finding ways to manage tasks without exhaustion or fear. The blizzard, though vast and unyielding, could not erase human ingenuity, cooperation, or the determination to maintain warmth, safety, and care. Each hidden struggle, faced with patience and attention, became a quiet triumph, a reminder that endurance often manifests in small, measured actions. As the storm pressed on, the soundscape of winter became more pronounced. Ice shifted and groaned beneath its own weight, sending low resonant creaks through rooftops and branches. Drifting snow scraped against walls and windows, producing a soft hiss that mingled with the wind's distant wail. These sounds, subtle yet persistent, became the rhythm of the blizzard, marking the passage of time in an almost hypnotic cadence. Families learned to listen. Each creak of the roof or snap of a branch held information, a warning of strain, a signal to check fires or reinforce structures. Children, attuned to the storm's rhythms, could sense changes in the wind, guessing when gusts might intensify or when snow might accumulate faster. On the roof, adults moved with quiet precision, their senses sharpened by days of attention to the blizzard's many voices. Even indoors, the sound of ice created intimacy, the occasional drop from a melting icicle, the scrape of frost shifting on windows, and the distant hollow knocks of frozen branches were reminders of life continuing beyond. Whilst listening became a form of meditation, a gentle way to connect with both the environment and one another. The storm's sounds, though stark, were not entirely harsh in their constancy. They offered rhythm, a natural cadence that synchronized with the slow, deliberate pace of families enduring the winter's might. In the echo of ice and wind, there was both caution and calm, a subtle harmony in the midst of hardship. As the blizzard pressed on, evenings gathered families closer to the warmth of their hearths. Firelight flickered across walls, illuminating faces lined with both fatigue and tenderness. In these quiet moments, storytelling became a lifeline, a bridge between past, present, and imagination. Grandparents recounted tales of winters long ago, of storms that tested courage, and of neighbors helping neighbors through adversity. Each story carried subtle lessons, patience, ingenuity, and the enduring power of community. Children listened, eyes wide, imagining figures trudging through drifts, animals huddled for warmth, and homes protected by shared care. Even adults found solace in the act of recounting memories. Conversations wandered, sometimes turning to lighter, comforting recollections. Summer days passed, family traditions or childhood adventures. The stories, gentle and measured, created continuity and calm, reminding everyone that hardship, no matter how severe, eventually softened with time. Outside, the storm howled, indifferent to human presence, but inside the fire's warmth, the flicker of light and the cadence of shared tales carved a small world of refuge. Laughter, whispers, and murmured observations blended into the rhythm of the household, a gentle counterpoint to the blizzard's persistent voice. In these evenings, the act of storytelling became a quiet ritual of endurance, nurturing hope and connection, even as the frozen world waited beyond the windows. By the 9th day, pathways leading from homes had become treacherous corridors of ice and snow. Every step required care. Boots, sinking into soft drifts, or sliding over frozen layers beneath. Shoveling was an endless task. The wind seemed to erase progress as quickly as it was made, sculpting fresh drifts along the edges of cleared spaces. Families moved slowly, deliberately, measuring each step. Children learned to test the snow with careful taps of their boots before committing their weight. Adults carried firewood or water along these frozen paths, balancing necessity with caution. Every journey, however short, became an exercise in patience and awareness. Even in towns, streets resembled sculpted mazes. Streetlights cast long shadows across drifts, making pathways glow faintly under snow's reflective surface. Vehicles were immobilized, leaving pedestrians as the primary travelers. The blizzard transformed ordinary routes into landscapes of endurance, demanding attention and adaptability. From anyone venturing out inside, families watched these shifting pathways with both concern and fascination. The snow's constant reformation became a visual record of the storm's power. And while the frozen corridors outside were unforgiving, they also offered moments of quiet wonder, tiny hills to slide down, tunnels to explore, and tracks left by animals, neighbors, or even the wind itself. Each step in the snow was a reminder of the balance between struggle and discovery, hardship and gentle curiosity. In the absence of reliable electricity, lanterns became essential companions during the blizzard. Their warm, steady glow cut through the grayness of snow-laden evenings, creating small circles of light that felt like islands of safety in the frozen world. Families placed them on tables, windowsills, or carried them carefully along snowbound paths, each flame a fragile yet vital source of warmth and reassurance. The light flickered with the subtle movements of air shadows, dancing across walls and ceilings. Children were fascinated watching shapes stretch and shrink, imagining stories in the interplay of light and darkness. Adults moved with careful deliberation, mindful not to tip lanterns or waste precious fuel, yet finding comfort in the gentle glow that illuminated faces and spaces alike. Outside lanterns guided the few who ventured through drifts to check on neighbors, collect firewood, or ensure animals were safe. The soft radiance was a beacon offering orientation and hope. Against the storm's whiteness, a single lantern could signal human presence across yards or streets, a quiet reassurance that life continued despite the relentless winter. Within homes, the lantern's light became a symbol as much as a tool, a steady heart against the blizzard's roar. Families gathered near, sharing warmth, conversation, and quiet observation. In the gentle flicker they found continuity, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, light, care, and attention could sustain life and spirit. By the 10th day, the cold had penetrated more than clothing and blankets. It settled into bones, a slow, insistent reminder of the storm's reach. Even indoors, drafts crept through window frames, chimneys, and roof cracks, chilling floors and furniture. Families huddled together, layering blankets, sharing body heat and drawing as close to fires as possible, seeking relief from a cold that was relentless and pervasive. The sensation was subtle, yet constant. Fingers stiffened quickly, toes became numb despite thick socks, and every movement carried a heightened awareness of warmth. Simple acts, pouring tea, stirring a pot, moving across a room were measured with care to avoid exposure and preserve energy. Children, sensing the tension of cold, learned to nestle closer, their small bodies seeking comfort from the surrounding adults. Outside, the air was sharper, cutting through coats and scarves. Each step brought resistance, not only from deep snow but from the icy wind that seemed to penetrate every layer of clothing. Adults working to clear paths or check on livestock developed slow, deliberate movements, careful not to overexert or expose skin unnecessarily. Despite this pervasive chill, warmth was found in proximity and action. Fires shared blankets, hot meals, and gentle touch provided relief, creating a rhythm of care and endurance. The storm's cold could reach the bones, but within homes, human presence, vigilance, and tenderness created spaces where survival and even comfort remained possible. By now, even the simplest markers of daily life had been transformed by snow mailboxes. Once, small fixtures along roads and driveways were swallowed by drifts, peeking out only occasionally as dark or icy silhouettes. Some were completely buried, their posts invisible beneath layers of white, requiring careful excavation before any correspondence could be retrieved. Children found fascination in these snowbound markers, using them as landmarks for games or as posts for snowball forts. Adults, however, treated them with caution and purpose. Mail, newspapers, and small packages were precious connections to the outside world, and reaching them became an act of careful planning and persistence. Paths were shoveled slowly, boots sinking into shifting snow, the wind constantly reshaping the terrain behind them. In towns, rows of buried mailboxes created an almost whimsical landscape, a forest of poles emerging intermittently from white waves. For families, these small retrieval missions carried both practicality and ritual, a moment to pause, to note how high the drifts had grown and to marvel at the blizzard's silent persistence. Each mailbox reclaimed became a small victory, a tangible reminder that, Despite the storm's vast and patient force, human effort could carve order and maintain connection. They symbolized more than mail. They were touch points, evidence that life, communication, and hope endured, even when the world outside seemed buried beyond recognition. Outside, the wind became more than a backdrop. It was a constant presence, whispering and wailing, shaping the world in ways both subtle and dramatic. It swept across fields and streets, lifting snow in thin, dancing threads, carving miniature ridges along rooftops and bending trees into graceful arcs. Its sound varied from a low, steady moan to sharp, piercing gusts, always reminding those inside of the storm's vigilance. Families grew attuned to the wind's language. Adults recognized shifts in its pitch, predicting heavier snowfall or drifting that might block doors and windows. Children listened with wide eyes, imagining the wind as a living presence, playful yet formidable, shaping the frozen landscape with invisible hands inside. The wind's song became part of the household rhythm. The creak of walls and roof lines, the soft tap of snow against glass, and the subtle howl through chimneys were all woven into daily life. Some found comfort in the continuity, the assurance that the storm, though fierce, followed patterns and could be read and respected. Evening gatherings often included reflections on the wind's passage, observing its dance through frosted trees, across fields or around homes. Families felt a blend of awe and caution. Its presence was a reminder of the blizzard's vast power, yet also of the intimacy and resilience found in homes where warmth, care, and attentiveness turned every gust into a part of life's rhythm rather than a source of despair. Vehicles, once reliable lifelines, were now immobilized by the blizzard's relentless accumulation. Cars, trucks, and tractors were buried beneath thick blankets of snow and ice, their shapes barely discernible under the frozen layers. Wind whipped fine snow across surfaces, creating icy films that glimmered in any stray light, making even the familiar forms appear alien. For those who relied on transportation for essential tasks, the loss was profound. Roads were impossible, vehicles trapped or abandoned, and any attempt to dig them out became an exhausting endeavor. Parents taught children to avoid these frozen hulks, aware of hidden dangers like slick surfaces, jagged ice, or shifting snow that could collapse onto limbs or vehicles themselves. Yet even in immobility, the vehicles became part of the winter landscape. Children climbed atop snow-topped cars, imagining them as castles or sledding hills. Adults observed them as reminders of human ingenuity. Constrained by nature's overwhelming force, every car cleared, every path shoveled, became a deliberate act of reclaiming agency in a frozen world. Inside, the presence of vehicles beyond the window reinforced lessons of patience and adaptation. Plans had to be flexible, tasks adjusted to the rhythm of the storm, and reliance on ingenuity and cooperation became essential. Even in a landscape where transportation had failed, households found ways to maintain continuity. Here in the subtle grace of endurance, rooftops, once a simple boundary between home and sky, had become intricate landscapes of snow and ice. Shingles were hidden beneath heavy layers, only the edges visible in places where wind had swept thin curtains of snow aside. Icicles hung in long, delicate lines, refracting light into fleeting rainbows. When the sun, or even the weak winter glow, broke through clouds, families watched the transformation with mixed awe and concern. The accumulation could bend or fracture structures, and every additional inch of snow was measured silently from below. Children traced patterns on frost-covered windows, sometimes mirroring the intricate natural designs on the rooftops above. Adults checked periodically, careful not to venture onto slippery surfaces unless absolutely necessary, aware of the strain on both wood and themselves. The rooftops became a form of communication with the storm. Snow's depth, the direction of drifts, and the formation of icicles all spoke volumes about wind patterns and weather changes. Observing these details allowed families to anticipate challenges, plan chores, and measure the storm's persistence. Even with the inherent danger, the beauty was undeniable. The blizzard had turned ordinary homes into sculpted works, each roof a frozen canvas. Families learned to see both the peril and the artistry, marveling at the quiet, patient hand of winter while tending to the practical needs of warmth and safety. Below, as dusk settled over snow-covered towns and countryside, the blizzard transformed the landscape into a muted world of shadows and soft light. The sun, low and dim behind thick clouds, cast a grayish-pink glow that reflected off snowdrifts, creating a gentle luminescence that softened the starkness of frozen streets and fields. Families inside homes felt the changing light keenly. Fireplaces were stoked higher, candles lit in anticipation of the long, cold night. Children paused their indoor games, mesmerized by the shifting hues outside, while adults moved slowly through rooms, attending to routines with careful efficiency. Every action carried a dual purpose, maintaining warmth and observing the subtle changes in the storm's mood. Outside, the wind seemed to slow, briefly creating a deceptive calm. Snowflakes swirled lazily, forming delicate patterns that drifted down onto rooftops and porches. The occasional glint of ice in the fading light caught the eye, a reminder that even as the day ended, the storm remained ever-present, patient and relentless. In these dusk hours, the blizzard's presence was at once calming and formidable. The softened light lent a dreamlike quality to the world, encouraging quiet reflection and shared observation. Families aware of the night ahead, prepared with meals, blankets, and careful planning, finding comfort in small rituals and the gentle glow that illuminated both rooms and spirits, readying themselves for the night's endurance. Rivers and streams, usually flowing freely, had surrendered to the blizzard's icy grip. Ice formed thick layers over water, rippling in patterns where the current struggled beneath. Snow piled along the banks, transforming gentle slopes into smooth, unbroken expanses of white that reflected the muted light of day or the flicker of lanterns at night. Families who lived near these waterways took careful note. Ice could be deceptive, thick in some areas, thin in others. Children were warned to avoid venturing too close, and adults measured each step with caution. Yet even with the dangers, the frozen rivers offered a stark, serene beauty. Snow-covered bridges looked like sculpted arcs, and the smooth, reflective surfaces of ice caught glimmers of candlelight or sunset in soft, mesmerizing flashes. Occasionally, animals left tracks along the river's edge. Rabbit prints, fox paths, or the faint indentation of a deer exploring the landscape. These small signs of life reminded families that, even in the storm's relentless grip, the natural world continued quietly adapting and enduring. From the windows of homes, parents and children alike would watch the river's frozen expanse, appreciating the calm contrast to the storm's chaos. The scene was both humbling and inspiring, nature's power and stillness on full display, a gentle reminder of patience, resilience, and the quiet endurance of life beneath winter's relentless hand. As midnight approached, the glow of hearths became the heart of homes. Outside, the blizzard roared with uninterrupted force, snow spiraling in chaotic, beautiful patterns, driven by winds that seemed to pierce the thickest layers of clothing. Inside, however, the hearth offered a sanctuary, its warmth spilling softly across floors, walls, and the faces of those gathered near. Children, lulled by firelight and the soft hum of whispered conversations, began to drift toward sleep, bodies curled beneath blankets that carried shared warmth. Adults remained near the hearth, tending fires with slow, careful motions, adding logs or coals at measured intervals to maintain steady heat. The scent of burning wood, mingling with the faint aroma of evening meals, created a cocoon of comfort against the storm outside. The midnight hours stretched gently. Conversations were subdued, punctuated only by the occasional crackle of flames or the distant whistle of the wind. In these quiet moments, Families felt both the vastness of the storm beyond and the intimacy of their small protected space. The rhythm of tending the fire, listening to the night and maintaining vigilance became a meditative practice, a steady pulse amid chaos. Even as the blizzard pressed against windows and doors, the glow of the hearth reminded everyone that warmth, care, and human presence could hold back the cold. It was a quiet affirmation that, though the storm raged, life within the home continued steadily, patiently and with enduring grace. Morning arrived slowly, filtered through thick clouds that muted the sun into a pale, diffuse light. Snow continued to fall, though the gusts had softened slightly, leaving the landscape a shimmering expanse of white. Every roof, fence, and tree branch bore the blizzard's imprint, glistening as the morning light caught the ice and frost. Families emerged cautiously from beds and blankets, stepping into the soft crunch of snow on floors and pathways. Even simple tasks, stoking the fire, preparing breakfast, carrying water required deliberate care. Children peered out windows, marveling at the transformation of their familiar world, where streets had vanished and drifts rose like miniature hills outside. Footprints from the previous day's efforts were partially erased, the storm's persistent hand reshaping the terrain overnight. Parents measured the snow's depth at doors and along fences, assessing hazards and planning the day's labor. Even in this harsh environment, there was an air of quiet anticipation. Small victories like cleared paths or warm meals carried the weight of triumph against the relentless winter. The morning offered subtle reminders of resilience. Warm hearts, shared meals, and careful routines became anchors, grounding families in rhythm and presence. The blizzard, vast and unyielding, dictated the pace, yet life adapted with every cautious step, every tending of fire or path. The inhabitants of this frozen world learned patience, endurance, and the quiet beauty of persistence. Farms usually bustling with life and movement had become silent, frozen tableau. Barns sagged under snow-laden roofs. Fences disappeared beneath drifts, and livestock huddled together seeking warmth and protection. The wind howled across open fields, creating rippling waves of snow that seemed to move as living things, reshaping paths and hiding familiar landmarks. Farmers rose early, despite exhaustion, layering clothing and braving the cold to check on animals. Each step required careful attention to avoid deep drifts or slick ice. Horses pressed together in stalls, cows nuzzled for warmth, and chickens roosted in corners, feathers fluffed tight against the chill. Supplies of feed and water became precious, rationed carefully to ensure survival through the relentless storm. Evenings in farmhouses were filled with quiet vigilance. Lanterns lit, small circles of warmth. Conversations were gentle, measured, acknowledging the fatigue and shared responsibility. Families relied on routines honed by necessity, stacking firewood, monitoring livestock, and repairing small damages caused by the snow's weight or wind's push. Despite hardship, the farmyards held subtle beauty. Snow-draped fences created soft lines across the fields, and icicles hung from barnacles like delicate sculptures. Every animal that survived, every path that was cleared, and every flicker of fire in a window became evidence of perseverance and care. In these frozen landscapes, life persisted patiently, slowly, and with quiet hope. Occasionally the storm softened, offering brief respites. In the afternoon the wind would lessen, the snow falls more gently, and the frozen landscape would seem still almost peaceful. These moments, though fleeting, were treasured. They allowed families to step outside cautiously, shovel paths, check on animals, or simply breathe the crisp, icy air without the full force of the blizzard pressing against them. Children sometimes ventured briefly into yards, their laughter muffled by snow, discovering small hills for sliding or delicate snow formations sculpted by wind. Adults moved deliberately, appreciating the calm to accomplish necessary chores, stacking firewood or repairing minor damage before the storm's return. Even inside, the atmosphere shifted with this pause. Hearths glowed brighter in contrast to the softened daylight, and windows offered views of snow-laden trees and fields resting beneath a temporary stillness. The quiet was almost meditative, inviting reflection on the endurance required in previous days and the careful preparation needed for the hours still to come. These brief afternoons reminded families that the blizzard, though relentless, had rhythms. Between its gusts and snowfalls were moments of clarity and calm, allowing humans and animals alike to catch their breath, plan and recover. The storm's power was undeniable, but in its pauses, life found subtle opportunities for adaptation, care and gentle appreciation of the frozen world's quiet beauty. By now, streets were entirely transformed. Where cars once traveled and pedestrians walked freely, only deep drifts remained. Snow had hidden curbs, signposts and familiar markers, leaving an unbroken expanse of white. Towns and villages seemed hushed, almost suspended, as the storm pressed its presence upon every structure and open space. Families navigated these streets with care. Adults shoveled carefully, ensuring paths to essential places, wells, outhouses or neighbors' homes remained accessible. Children, bundled tightly in layers, explored cautiously, their laughter, muffled but still present, echoing softly against snow-covered buildings. Each footprint was temporary, as the wind constantly reshaped the landscape, erasing signs of passage almost as soon as they were made. In urban areas, streetlights cast long, diffused beams across the snow, revealing the storm's artistry, drifts sculpted into waves, corners filled with delicate patterns of frost and rooftops, gleaming under icy coatings. Even as the blizzard hindered travel, it created a visual rhythm, a frozen choreography that fascinated children and adults alike. Navigating the snowbound streets became an exercise in patience, observation, and community care. Neighbors helped one another clear pathways, share supplies, and check on those unable to venture outside amid the white expanse. These acts of connection reinforced the quiet resilience that carried towns through the storm, one careful step at a time. Trees, those steadfast sentinels of the land, bore the brunt of the blizzard's persistence. Limbs sagged under thick layers of snow and ice, some bending perilously close to the ground. The wind, relentless in its force, pushed against branches, causing them to groan, crack, or occasionally snap, sending cascades of frozen powder onto drifts below. Families observed the trees with both caution and awe. Children marveled at the shapes, sometimes playing beneath the natural arches formed by bent limbs, while adults assessed hazards, clearing paths to prevent accidents and monitoring the forested areas near homes. The storm transformed familiar landscapes into dynamic sculptures, each tree bearing unique marks of resilience or strain. In rural settings, farmers paid particular attention. Fallen branches could damage fences or block paths to barns and livestock, requiring careful removal, even as the blizzard raged. The forest taught lessons in endurance. Each tree bent but standing symbolized the quiet strength needed to withstand relentless pressure. Inside, families reflected on the scene outside. The juxtaposition of vulnerability and resilience mirrored their own experience. Exposed to the storm, yet protected by care, warmth, and cooperation, the snow-laden trees were both warning and inspiration, showing that even under immense weight, life could persist with patience and grace. As daylight faded into evening, lanterns became the lifeblood of activity and comfort. Their warm amber glow spilled across snow-packed floors and furniture, casting elongated dancing shadows that made rooms feel both intimate and expansive. The gentle light seemed to pulse with life, a counterbalance to the storm raging beyond walls and windows. Children gathered near lanterns, eyes wide, mesmerized by the flame's flicker. Some traced shapes on tables or wrote in journals, while others listened to quiet stories or soft songs. Adults moved with careful grace, tending the lanterns to ensure steady light while performing evening chores, preparing meals, stacking firewood or checking that windows and doors remained sealed against drifting snow. Outside, lanterns guided those venturing briefly into the storm, neighbors delivering essential supplies, someone checking on livestock or the cautious clearing of paths. The light became a beacon, signaling human presence amid the vast whiteness, providing both reassurance and orientation. Within homes, the lantern's glow symbolized endurance. It was a tangible expression of attention, care and warmth illuminating not only space but also spirit. In the calm, measured moments surrounding these small fires, families felt a connection to each other, to the rhythm of daily life and to the gentle, patient persistence that allowed them to endure the blizzard's vast embrace. By the 11th day, snow had accumulated into large rolling drifts that reshaped the landscape into a series of miniature hills and valleys. Streets, yards, and open fields appeared almost sculptural, the wind carving, sweeping curves and ridges that shifted subtly throughout the day. Each drift was unique, some smooth and inviting, others jagged and treacherous, transforming the familiar into a playground and challenge at once. Children were drawn to these formations, sledding down slopes and exploring tunnels that the snow itself seemed to have created. Their laughter, muffled by the dense air, became a soft accompaniment to the storm's persistent howl. Adults observed carefully, guiding them, clearing paths and marking areas too dangerous to explore, ensuring both safety and enjoyment for families tending homes and animals. The drifts presented both obstacle and opportunity. Shoveling paths was a measured, continuous effort, a way to maintain connection to essential areas. Yet the snow's artistry also inspired quiet reflection. The curves, ridges, and waves created a visual rhythm, a reminder of the storm's power, patience, and persistent beauty. Even in hardship, these snowdrifts offered subtle joy. They were temporary sculptures, reminders of nature's force and imagination's freedom, navigating, observing, and playing. Among them, families found small moments of delight and wonder amid the overwhelming vastness of the blizzard. Outside, the air was crisp and sharp, carrying a scent unique to deep winter storms. Each inhalation brought the faint, clean aroma of snow, mingled with the earthy undertones of frozen soil and evergreens. The wind sometimes intensified the smell, sweeping it through towns, across fields and into homes through the smallest cracks in doors and windows. Families noticed the scent more keenly as they ventured briefly outside, bundling tightly against the cold. Children pressed their noses into scarves, sniffing the crisp air with curiosity, while adults paused to savor the rare clarity of winter's essence. Amid the relentless storm, even simple tasks, clearing a path, fetching water, or checking on animals, became a sensory experience. Each breath reminding them of the environment's vastness and vitality. Inside, the smell was faint but perceptible, filtered through doors and windows. It mingled with the warmth of fires and the subtle aroma of food, creating a layered, comforting atmosphere. The contrast between the biting chill outside and the cozy interior heightened the awareness of shelter, warmth, and human care. The scent of winter air became a quiet anchor. It was a reminder of the storm's presence, the persistence of nature, and the intimate connection between the external world and the lives unfolding indoors. Each inhalation was both grounding and invigorating, reinforcing resilience, attentiveness, and the subtle beauty of enduring life in a frozen landscape. As late afternoon faded into evening, shadows stretched across the snow-covered landscape, muted by the gray light of the storm. Buildings, trees, and fences cast long, soft silhouettes, sometimes distorted by drifting snow or the angle of fading sunlight. The effect was surreal. Familiar objects became abstract shapes, merging with the white expanse and creating a sense of otherworldliness. Families watched the shadows from windows, or while moving carefully along cleared paths. Children whispered to one another about shapes in the snow, imagining creatures or hidden worlds shaped by light and drift. Adults took note of the shadows to gauge the sun's position, plan tasks, or simply appreciate the quiet beauty that the storm allowed. Even inside, the interplay of fire, light, and dim exterior illumination created layered shadows across walls and furniture. These movements were slow, almost hypnotic, and encouraged calm reflection. The contrast between the stark shifting world outside and the warm, steady interior emphasized the delicate balance between vulnerability and security. The blizzard's shadows were both enchanting and humbling. They reminded families of the storm's scale and persistence, while offering moments of visual wonder. In their presence, people learned to move with awareness, notice subtle beauty, and find peace within the vast frozen environment. Frost crept across windows in intricate patterns, weaving delicate filigree that seemed almost handcrafted. Each pane became a miniature work of art, the design shifting slowly as the interior warmth met the relentless chill outside. Spirals, feathers, and abstract shapes spread across glass, capturing sunlight during the day or lantern light at night in sparkling, transient beauty. Children pressed gloved fingers against the frost, tracing shapes and leaving temporary impressions that disappeared almost immediately. Adults observed silently, appreciating the combination of wonder and fragility, the knowledge that these frozen creations would vanish with heat or touch, a reminder of impermanence even amidst the storm's enduring presence. The frosted panes also served as a subtle barrier, a tactile reminder of the separation between warmth and cold. Families leaned against windowsills, listening to the wind outside, while observing the intricate patterns before them. Each glance became a meditative moment, blending observation, reflection, and quiet admiration. Even in the harshest winter conditions, the frost offered moments of awe. It illustrated the delicate, patient artistry of nature and reminded those inside of life's capacity for beauty, even in struggle. The frost was fleeting, yet its impact lingered, inviting careful attention, gentle touch, and shared wonder among all who paused to see it. Nightfall deepened the blizzard's presence, wrapping the world in a quiet, intense darkness, punctuated only by the occasional flicker of lanterns or the dim glow of windows. Snow continued to fall, muted by the night, drifting silently and reshaping the landscape as if the world were being smoothed and new. The wind's howl became the dominant voice, a steady, haunting lullaby that carried across fields, streets, and forests alike. Families settled into routines honed over days of storm. Children were tucked under thick blankets, their breathing slow and rhythmic faces softened by firelight. Adults maintained vigilance, checking stoves and fires, monitoring the condition of windows and doors, and quietly ensuring that paths to essentials remained passable. Every action was deliberate, measured, a part of the rhythm that sustained life during relentless winter nights. The darkness heightened awareness. Shadows of snowdrifts appeared more mysterious, the outlines of trees sharper against the dim horizon, and the creaking of ice-laden structures more pronounced. Yet within homes, warmth, light, and human presence created a sanctuary. Conversations were hushed, movements gentle, and moments of reflection became abundant as families observed both the storm's vastness and the intimate safety of their immediate surroundings. Night reinforced the blizzard's duality, formidable outside, nurturing care and connection inside. In these hours, patience and endurance were most tangible, as the quiet persistence of human presence met the unyielding winter world, creating a fragile but enduring balance through the white expanse. Every footprint told a story, tracks of humans, animals, and occasionally vehicles that had braved the storm, created subtle patterns across yards, streets, and fields. Each impression offered clues where someone had walked, how deep the snow lay, or which paths had been recently cleared. Children followed these tracks eagerly, imagining journeys and adventures in a frozen world. Foxes, rabbits, and stray birds left delicate imprints that sparked curiosity and wonder, while adults read the paths carefully, ensuring safe routes and observing the habits of wildlife, coping with the storm. Even fleeting tracks, soon to be erased by wind or fresh snowfall, were noted with attention, a record of movement and life. Amidst the blizzard's vast stillness, inside homes, families watched from windows, interpreting the snow's subtle messages. A new set of footprints might signal a neighbor checking on them, a delivery or an animal searching for shelter. The tracks became a silent communication, a gentle reassurance that even in isolation, the world continued to interact, shift and respond. In observing these marks, people found connection and rhythm. Life persisted in small, almost imperceptible ways. Each track a testament to endurance, curiosity, and the quiet interplay between human, animal, and nature. In the frozen landscape, as sunlight struggled through the heavy clouds, snow and ice transformed it into a diffuse, shimmering glow that blanketed the world. Roots, trees, and snow drift sparkled faintly, reflecting pale light into homes through frosted windows. The effect was ethereal, softening the harsh outlines of structures and blending the landscape into gentle gradients of white and gray. Families noticed these subtle shifts. Children pressed faces against glass, marveling at the sparkle and imagining magical scenes, while adults moved with awareness, appreciating how the changing light signaled the day's rhythm. Even indoor spaces seemed to carry this reflected brilliance, as firelight mingled with the muted sunlight to create warm, layered illumination. Outside, the reflections made navigation both easier and more surreal. Paths glowed faintly, snowbanks appeared sculptural, and icicles caught glimmers like tiny prisms. The world felt both transformed and alive, with light moving slowly across the undulating surfaces, tracing patterns that shifted with the angle of the sun and the storm's relentless hand. This interplay of light and snow became another marker of the blizzard's presence. Families learned to watch, interpret, and enjoy these subtle moments of beauty, finding calm and fascination in the quiet artistry of winter. Each glimmer, shadow, and shimmer reminded them that even in hardship, the world held delicate, enduring wonder. Amid the endless snow and wind, the blizzard seemed almost alive, telling its own whispered stories. Gusts carried the faintest sounds, branches creaking, snow shifting, and ice settling, which, when listened to carefully, became a rhythm and language. All their own families learned to interpret these sounds, sensing the storm's strength, direction, and changes over time. Children wrapped in blankets near the hearth imagined the wind speaking secrets of distant places, of forests, rivers, and fields unseen. Adults listened with quiet attention, reading subtle shifts to guide chores, care for animals, or maintain paths and structures. The blizzard's voice was persistent, but not malevolent. It was a reminder of nature's presence, its patience, and its quiet insistence on endurance. Inside homes, families shared their interpretations of the sounds, creating narratives to explain the subtle phenomena. Outside, a groan of ice might become the story of a wandering creature, a whispering gust, a distant traveler or messenger. These whispered tales softened the storm's harshness, weaving it into daily life and transforming the relentless noise into a shared rhythm of attention, imagination, and connection. Through these whispered stories, the storm became both challenge and companion. Its persistence taught patience, its patterns rewarded observation, and its sounds offered a gentle, ongoing reminder of life's intricate interplay with the world beyond walls. Even amid the storm's relentless grip, the ritual of shared meals provided warmth, nourishment, and connection. Kitchens and hearths became central, filling homes with the scent of simmering soups, baked bread, and hot tea. Every meal was carefully prepared, mindful of ration supplies and the need to sustain energy for both the work and patience. The blizzard demanded families gathered, close-seated near fires or tables, passing bowls and utensils with quiet deliberation. Conversation was soft but comforting, stories and laughter threading through the room in a steady, gentle rhythm. Children learned not only the practical aspects of cooking and eating in winter's harshness, but also the intangible lessons of togetherness, cooperation, and care. Outside, the blizzard continued its sweeping, indifferent course, but inside, meals offered a controlled, comforting counterpoint. The heat of the kitchen, the smell of food, and the shared presence of loved ones formed a sanctuary against the cold and isolation. Each bite, each sip became an act of resilience, a small affirmation that life, nourishment, and human connection endured despite the storm's vastness. In these moments, warmth was more than physical. It was emotional, spiritual, and communal, reminding all who sat together that even in the harshest winters, comfort could be cultivated and shared, sustaining both body and soul. As the 12th day of the storm unfolded, the blizzard seemed to settle into a relentless, measured rhythm. Snow continued to fall, though the intensity fluctuated, and the wind carved drifts with patient, deliberate persistence. Every surface, rooftops, streets, trees, and fences bore the cumulative imprint of nearly 2 weeks of winter's dominance. Families moved through their routines with almost meditative patience. Paths were cleared slowly, fires tended carefully, and meals shared with quiet gratitude. Even in fatigue, there was an acute awareness of progress, of small victories won against the storm. A cleared path, a sturdy roof, livestock fed, or simply the comfort of warmth within walls. The storm's vastness was humbling. Each gust and swirl of snow reminded everyone of nature's unyielding scale. Yet within homes, resilience had taken root. Children played briefly, careful to avoid deep drifts, while adults monitored the world outside with vigilance and respect. Every sound, every shift in wind or snow was noted with attentive care. By the end of the day, there was a sense of quiet anticipation, a collective understanding that endurance had carried families through one of the harshest winters in memory. The blizzard, though still present, had settled into a pattern that allowed for reflection, careful observation, and a subtle hope that the storm's eventual retreat might be near. After nearly 2 weeks of relentless winter, subtle changes began to appear. The snow's texture shifted, becoming slightly softer underfoot, and faint patches of slush emerged. Where sunlight, feeble but persistent, reached the ground, the wind lost some of its bite, blowing with less force and allowing snowflakes to drift lazily instead of being whipped into blinding sheets. Families noticed these small shifts with cautious optimism. Children ventured further into yards, testing the softened snow with tentative steps, their laughter carrying more freely as they explored newly formed slopes and drifts. Adults assessed paths, roofs, and livestock areas, aware that shoring snow and ice could bring new challenges, yet relieved at the lessening severity of the storm. Windows that had been thick with frost began to clear in places, revealing glimpses of muted sunlight or distant hills now softened by the storm's passing. The frozen riverbanks showed cracks and thin sheets of melting ice, subtle indicators that the world outside was slowly returning to motion. Even indoors, the sense of change was palpable. Fires still burned, but warmth was easier to maintain, and household tasks required slightly less effort. This delicate transition marked the beginning of hope, a gentle reminder that the blizzard, formidable as it had been, could eventually be endured, and that life, persistent and resilient, would continue in the shoring landscape. As the blizzard began to loosen its grip, the soundscape of the frozen world shifted, gone with the constant sharp gusts that had driven snow into every corner. Instead, a softer whisper of wind moved through trees, carrying with it the subtle drip of melting icicles and the occasional crunch of snow settling under its own weight. Even the faint trickle of water along previously frozen streams could be heard, a delicate announcement that winter's harshness was gradually easing. Families listened intently, attuned to every nuance. Children pressed their ears to the windows, marveling at the gentle sounds, while adults interpreted the changes, noting which areas might now be safer to explore or where Snow and ice might begin to shift unexpectedly. Every creak, drip and rustle was a sign of transition. A world moving cautiously from frozen stillness back toward motion and life inside. The warmth of the hearth and the glow of lanterns now mingled with these soft outside sounds, creating a layered, comforting rhythm. Conversations became lighter, laughter more frequent and movements more relaxed, yet still careful. The household seemed to breathe in tandem with the changing storm, attuning to the promise of Thor, without forgetting the lessons of endurance the blizzard had taught. In this gentle auditory shift, families found a unique kind of reassurance. The blizzard's voice had softened, but its presence remained a reminder of resilience, patience, and the quiet beauty of a world in transition, offering hope that life's rhythms could continue beyond the frozen trial. After days of gray, heavy skies, the sun finally made tentative appearances, its pale light spilling across the snow-covered landscape. The glow was gentle, almost shy, casting long, soft shadows and illuminating frost-laden branches with a silvery shimmer. Snow that had seemed endless now reflected the sunlight in sparkling patterns, revealing textures and shapes that had been hidden for days beneath layers of storm. Families paused to observe this change. Children pressed faces against windows or ran outside, briefly marveling at the fleeting warmth and brilliance. Adults took careful note, assessing which areas might be safer to navigate, where ice had begun to soften, or how the sun's rays could aid in clearing paths and drying damp clothing or boots. Inside, the morning routines gained a new brightness. Lanterns and fires still provided warmth and illumination, but the addition of natural light created a gentle balance, softening rooms and casting subtle patterns across walls and floors. The interplay of indoor and outdoor light fostered a sense of hope and continuity, a quiet assurance that even the harshest winter could yield to gradual renewal. The first glimmers of sun were more than a meteorological event. They were a symbol, a reminder that patience, care, and endurance had carried families through the storm, and that the world outside, though altered, was ready to resume its slow, steady rhythm. With the sun's gentle persistence, icicles that had clung stubbornly to eaves and rooflines began to shift and drip. Tiny beads of water formed at their tips, falling rhythmically onto snow-covered porches and pathways. Below each drop echoed softly a delicate percussion that contrasted with the blizzard's previous roar. Families observed these small signals with a mixture of awe and caution. Children laughed at the dripping icicles, trying to catch drops on gloved hands or imagining the sound as tiny bells ringing from the roof. Adults, mindful of safety, cleared areas where icicles might fall more heavily, ensuring paths remained passable, and that no one ventured beneath the largest formations. The dripping water became a daily reminder of transition. Roots released their frozen burden. Slowly melting snow formed. Tiny streams along gutters and puddles began to appear where drifts had settled unevenly. Even the faintest movement of water carried reassurance. The storm's intensity had passed, and the world was beginning to breathe again. Inside homes, families noted the changes, hearing the drops mix with the gentle warmth of fires and the low hum of daily life. The rhythm of melting snow and dripping icicles was both soothing and promising, a subtle melody marking the passage from hardship toward recovery and renewal. As temperatures slowly rose and the snow began to soften, signs of life returned to the frozen world. Birds, previously scarce, cautiously emerged from sheltered trees, hopping along snow-covered branches and pecking at exposed seeds. Squirrels and small mammals began venturing from burrows, leaving delicate tracks that intersected with human footprints. Even larger animals like deer moved more visibly across fields, navigating softened drifts in search of sustenance. Families watched these returning creatures with quiet fascination. Children pressed noses to frosted windows, identifying tracks and counting the birds that flitted cautiously nearby. Adults observed from a practical perspective, noting which areas required clearing for safety or which food sources needed replenishing for domesticated animals. Every movement in the snow was a reminder that the natural world had endured, adapted, and was re-emerging in careful, measured steps. The presence of wildlife brought comfort and hope. It symbolized the persistence of life despite adversity, echoing the family's own experiences. Throughout the blizzard, watching a bird land gently on a snow-laden branch or a fox explore the edges of a field reminded everyone that the frozen world was alive and resilient, ready to resume its cycles once more inside homes. These small glimpses of life provided joy and reassurance, reinforcing a sense of connection between humans and the natural world, and marking another gentle step toward recovery from the storm's long, relentless hold. With the passing of days, the relentless rigidity of snowdrifts began to ease. Previously, sharp icy edges softened under the sun's warm indirect rays, and pathways once treacherously packed with ice became more navigable. The world, which had seemed locked in a perpetual stillness, now displayed subtle movement as snow shifted, settled, and occasionally trickled into small rivulets along fences and rooftops. Families noticed these changes carefully. Children ventured further, their boots sinking pleasantly into the softer snow as they explored gentle slopes and remnants of drifts. Adults used the softened snow to complete chores that had been impossible during the peak of the storm, like clearing larger areas around homes or repairing structures. Strained under the winter's weight, even the smallest sounds became more noticeable. The crunch beneath boots was less harsh and more rhythmic. The soft linking of melting ice echoed faintly across yards, and the distant calls of returning birds blended with the gentle wind. These subtle signs offered reassurance that the world was moving back toward a familiar rhythm. Softening snowdrifts were more than a physical change, they were symbolic. They represented the gradual easing of the storm's dominance, a gentle reminder that patience, care, and persistence had weathered the worst, and that the frozen world was slowly, beautifully reclaiming its natural flow. As warmth increased indoors and the sun's rays filtered through, frost on windows began to retreat. Tiny patterns melted into droplets that traced delicate lines down the glass, leaving behind clearer views of the shoring world outside. Each window pane became a living canvas recording the slow, patient retreat of ice and snow. As the storm's grip loosened, children pressed faces against the glass, delighted by the changing patterns, pointing out rivulets that sparkled in sunlight. Adults gently wiped areas to observe the landscape more clearly, noting how the snowdrift softened, how rooftops shed icy coatings, and how distant trees began to reveal their dark limbs, once hidden beneath thick layers. The melting frost offered more than just visibility. It was a visual confirmation of transition. Inside, the warmth of fires and human activity mingled with the soft light streaming through partially cleared panes, creating a soothing layered ambiance. Families felt the tension of the blizzard begin to release, replaced by a quiet anticipation of renewal and reconnection with the world beyond their walls. Watching frost recede became a shared contemplative activity, a moment to reflect on endurance, patience, and the subtle beauty inherent in the slow passage from frozen stillness toward life's gradual return. With the thaw streets that had been buried under relentless snow, drifts began to re-emerge. Curbs, sidewalks, and familiar landmarks slowly returned to view, softened by melting snow, yet recognizable once more. The transformation was gradual. Mounds of snow persisted, but paths widened, revealing the skeleton of towns and villages hidden for nearly 2 weeks. Families ventured carefully outside, clearing the remaining snow with shovels and makeshift tools. Children, bundled warmly, explored cautiously, leaving footprints alongside those of neighbors and returning wildlife. The streets, once silent and forbidding under the blizzard's weight, now echoed with the gentle sounds of movement, boots crunching on softening snow, water trickling along edges, and distant voices calling to one another in cautious reunion with the world. The emerging streets symbolized more than physical passage. They represented reconnection, mobility, and a subtle return to routine. Neighbors greeted one another warmly, offering assistance in clearing paths, sharing news, or simply enjoying the sight of familiar places slowly reappearing. Even as the storm's memory lingered in drifts and icy patches, the world was beginning to reclaim its rhythm, guided by human perseverance and careful attention. Though winter still lingered, hints of spring began to whisper through the thawing landscape. Patches of earth appeared where snow had receded, and the soft, dark soil contrasted with the lingering white, offering the first subtle signs of renewal. Small streams flowed steadily, fed by melted snow, and the air carried a slightly warmer, earthier scent. Families stepped outside with cautious optimism. Children explored these new spaces, delighted by the discovery of soft mud beneath their boots and the occasional sprig of winter, hardy greenery peeking through the snow. Adults began planning repairs, tending gardens, and preparing for the gradual transition from survival to restoration. The lessons of endurance and patience gained during the blizzard informed every action, lending care and attentiveness to even the smallest tasks. The thaw, gentle and deliberate, encouraged reflection. The blizzard's power had been immense, yet life had persisted, adapted, and now subtly shifted toward renewal. Homes, streets, animals, and people all bore traces of the storm. Yet all were resilient, ready to resume a rhythm tempered by the trial they had endured. This first breath of spring was a promise that, even after the harshest winters, warmth, growth, and quiet beauty would return, and life, steady and patient, would continue its course once more. By now, the blizzard had largely loosened its grip, leaving behind a transformed but recovering world. Streets and paths were gradually cleared. Snowdrifts softened, and the first green hints of spring peeked through lingering snow patches. Birds, small mammals, and even larger wildlife moved more confidently across fields and yards, reasserting the rhythms of life that had been paused. Families emerged from their homes with a sense of cautious celebration. Children played in the remaining snow, tossing soft handfuls and laughing at each toss, while adults worked together to repair structures, clear remaining drifts, and tend livestock or gardens. There was a quiet joy in these acts, a recognition that endurance and patience had carried them through one of the harshest storms in memory. Indoors evenings regained warmth and comfort, fires crackling steadily as families reflected on the weeks past. The blizzard's presence remained in memory, etched in footprints in drifted snow and in stories shared with neighbors, but it no longer dictated every movement or breath. Instead, it had become part of a narrative of resilience, care, and human adaptability, leaving a gentle awareness of both nature's power and the quiet strength of those who endure. The world, though scarred and altered, now held a calm, soothing rhythm. Families rested more easily, feeling a renewed connection to each other and the environment, appreciating the fragility and persistence of life and the promise of continued renewal. Thank you for joining this journey through America's worst winter storm, the Great Blizzard of 1978. As you settle in and allow your mind to rest, remember the patience, resilience, and quiet beauty that emerge from the cold. Let the warmth of home, the calm rhythm of nature, and the gentle persistence of life guide you into a restful state. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and comment below, especially if you're watching from the US, Europe, or anywhere else around the world. Share your thoughts, your memories, or simply your appreciation for the story's calm, immersive journey. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and carry the soothing lessons of endurance, care, and quiet hope into your dreams. Tonight, the Great Blizzard of 1978 has passed, but its gentle, enduring lessons remain.